Steel rained from the sky. Black smoke swallowed the horizon. A crippled American fighter limped home with half its wings shredded, its fuselage peppered with holes, and one cylinder of its massive engine burning red. German anti-aircraft guns continued firing long after the aircraft had disappeared into the clouds. The pilot tightened his grip, expecting the engine to quit at any second. It never did. Against every prediction, the aircraft crossed the English Channel and touched down safely. Ground crews rushed toward it, then froze. They counted hundreds of bullet holes. Pieces of the tail were missing. Entire sections of metal looked as though they had been torn away with a giant hammer. No one could understand how it had stayed in the air. Pilots began whispering a new nickname: the Flying Tank. But this machine was never supposed to exist. Several years earlier, Europe stood on the edge of catastrophe. It was 1939. Across the Atlantic, the United States watched as Nazi Germany rebuilt its air force into one of the most powerful fighting machines the world had ever seen. Fast, agile fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 were proving that air superiority could decide the outcome of entire campaigns. American military planners realized their own fighter aircraft might soon be outclassed. The U.S. Army Air Corps needed an airplane capable of escorting bombers, surviving intense enemy fire, and fighting at high altitude over Europe. Speed alone would not be enough. Firepower alone would not be enough. They needed an aircraft that could absorb punishment and still bring its pilot home. Yet almost everyone believed such a fighter would simply become too heavy to fly. That assumption was about to be challenged. Inside Republic Aviation, one engineer refused to think small. His name was Alexander Kartveli, a brilliant Georgian-born designer whose career had taken him across Europe before eventually bringing him to the United States. Quiet, determined, and stubborn when it came to engineering, Kartveli believed the future belonged to power rather than compromise. While others searched for ways to make fighters lighter, he imagined building one around the largest engine available. Many of his colleagues thought the idea bordered on madness. A giant engine meant a giant aircraft. A giant aircraft meant extra weight. Extra weight meant poor maneuverability. On paper, the project seemed doomed before construction had even begun. But Kartveli kept sketching. He believed raw horsepower could solve problems that elegant designs never could. And soon he would have a chance to prove it. Everything changed when Republic engineers selected the enormous Pratt Whitney R-2800 double wasp engine, one of the most powerful piston engines ever fitted to a fighter aircraft. The engine produced more than 2,000 horsepower, forcing the designers to build an aircraft unlike anything the Army Air Corps had ever ordered. The fuselage grew wider. The wings became stronger. The propeller expanded to nearly 4 meters in diameter, requiring unusually long landing gear just to keep the blades from striking the ground. Critics mocked the design before it had even flown. Some called it too bulky to dogfight. Others predicted it would become an expensive failure. Yet Kartveli ignored the criticism. He wasn't building the lightest fighter in the sky. He was building one that could survive the impossible. What happened during the first flight would silence many of those doubts, but it would also reveal a problem that threatened the entire project. The prototype roared down the runway in the spring of 1941, its massive radial engine shaking the ground before the wheels even left the pavement. For a brief moment, Kartveli's gamble seemed to be paying off. The aircraft climbed with astonishing power, and test pilots immediately noticed how stable it felt at high speed. But the celebration didn't last long. The enormous fighter revealed flaws that no blueprint had predicted. Its weight reduced agility during tight turns, visibility from the cockpit was limited by the long nose, and engineers struggled to fine-tune the turbo-supercharger system hidden deep inside the fuselage. Maintenance crews complained that the complex ducting made repairs difficult. Military officials began asking uncomfortable questions. Had Republic built an engineering masterpiece, or a very expensive mistake? Yet this wasn't the biggest problem. As pressure mounted, the United States was pulled into World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Suddenly there was no time to start over. The Army Air Forces needed fighters immediately, and Republic Aviation found itself under enormous government pressure to turn an experimental aircraft into a frontline weapon. Factories expanded almost overnight. Thousands of workers assembled airframes around the clock while engineers made improvements directly on the production line. Every new aircraft carried small changes learned from the one before it. Armor plating was strengthened. Systems became more reliable. Pilots requested better visibility and improved controls. It was engineering at wartime speed, where every delay could cost lives overseas. Then an impossible decision was made. Instead of trying to make the Thunderbolt lighter, Republic leaned into its greatest strength: The aircraft gained even more armor to protect the pilot. Self-sealing fuel tanks increased survivability after enemy fire. 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns gave it devastating firepower, while the powerful turbo-supercharged engine allowed it to perform exceptionally well at high altitude. The result was unlike any fighter then flying over Europe. It wasn't the fastest in a turning fight, but it could dive at incredible speed, absorb punishment that would destroy other aircraft, and still deliver a crushing attack. Pilots quickly learned that survival often depended on energy rather than tight maneuvering. If an enemy fighter tried to outturn the Thunderbolt, its pilot climbed away, built speed, and struck again with overwhelming force. History was beginning to favor Kartveli's vision. By 1943, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt finally entered the skies over occupied Europe in large numbers. The first combat missions were tense. Thick bomber formations stretched across the clouds while Luftwaffe fighters waited for the perfect moment to attack. Deep inside the American cockpits, pilots could hear little except the steady roar of the R-2800 engine and the constant crackle of radio traffic. "Bandits, 12 o'clock high," came the warning. Within seconds, the peaceful sky exploded into chaos. Tracer rounds crossed the air like glowing threads. Bombers struggled to hold formation as German fighters dived through them. Thunderbolt pilots pushed their throttles forward and charged into the fight. The aircraft's sheer size initially surprised German pilots, many expecting an easy victory against what looked like an oversized target. But the real surprise came moments later. The Thunderbolt refused to break apart under punishment. It kept climbing. It kept firing. And more often than anyone expected, it brought its pilots home even after suffering damage that should have ended the mission. That reputation spread rapidly across Europe, setting the stage for the battle that would define the flying tank forever. The defining moment came in the months surrounding D-Day and the breakout from Normandy in the summer of 1944. Allied armies pushed inland through hedgerows while German armor rushed toward the front. The skies above France never truly fell silent. At dawn, Thunderbolts lifted from rough airfields with bombs and rockets hanging beneath their wings. Their mission was no longer just escorting bombers. They had become flying artillery. Pilots swept low over roads and railways, hunting tanks, trucks, fuel convoys, bridges, and troop columns. German soldiers soon learned to recognize the deep roar of the massive radial engine. The moment they heard it, many abandoned their vehicles and searched for cover. Seconds later, 8.50 caliber machine guns ripped across the landscape, followed by rockets and bombs that turned columns of steel into burning wreckage. That's when everything changed. One of the Thunderbolt's greatest strengths was something few people appreciated at the time: its ability to survive extreme low-level combat. Flying just above the treetops exposed pilots to machine guns, anti-aircraft cannons, and even rifle fire. Most fighters couldn't absorb that kind of punishment for long. The P-47 could. Its air-cooled radial engine lacked the vulnerable liquid cooling system used by many other fighters, meaning a single bullet was far less likely to destroy the engine. Combined with heavy armor and rugged construction, the aircraft earned the trust of its pilots in a way few machines ever had. Many returned to base with shattered wings, torn control surfaces, and hundreds of bullet holes. Ground crews often looked at the damaged aircraft in disbelief, wondering how they had remained airborne. The answer wasn't luck alone. Kartveli had designed an airplane that could keep fighting even while falling apart. Yet one mystery remained hidden behind closed doors. Early in the war, many commanders questioned whether such a large fighter should continue production once newer aircraft entered service. The arrival of the North American P-51 Mustang changed everything. With its exceptional range and elegant aerodynamics, the Mustang quickly became the preferred long-range bomber escort. Some officials argued that the Thunderbolt's days were numbered. Internal discussions even considered reducing production. But battlefield reports told a different story. Whenever ground forces needed immediate air support, Thunderbolt squadrons consistently delivered devastating results. Their ability to carry heavy bomb loads, unleash rockets with remarkable accuracy, and survive repeated attacks made them irreplaceable. History almost took a different path. During the Battle of the Bulge in the winter of 1944, that decision proved invaluable. As German forces launched their surprise offensive through the snow-covered Ardennes, poor weather initially grounded Allied aircraft. Then the skies finally cleared. Hundreds of P-47 Thunderbolts thundered into the freezing air, attacking tanks, supply lines, bridges, and marching columns across the battlefield. Pilots flew through snow showers, smoke, and relentless anti-aircraft fire, striking targets so close to friendly troops that every attack demanded absolute precision. German advances slowed as roads became graveyards of burning vehicles. Allied soldiers on the ground watched the big fighters dive through the clouds and knew help had arrived. The flying tank had evolved into one of the most feared ground attack aircraft of the Second World War. But even as victory approached, military planners were already preparing for a future where piston-engine fighters would soon give way to an entirely new generation of aircraft. Victory in 1945 brought celebration, but it also marked the beginning of the Thunderbolt's final chapter. The war that had shaped its purpose was over. Across Europe and the Pacific, thousands of aircraft suddenly became surplus. Air forces around the world looked toward a new era dominated by speed, altitude, and a revolutionary technology that had already begun changing aviation forever: jet engines. Even the mighty P-47, with its enormous radial engine and unmatched toughness, could not outrun the future. Production gradually ended as newer aircraft promised greater performance. Many Thunderbolts were transferred to Allied nations, while others disappeared into military storage yards, their once polished aluminum skins slowly fading beneath the sun. It seemed the flying tank had reached the end of its story. But history wasn't quite finished with it. One little-known chapter remained hidden for decades. Republic engineers had continued experimenting with improved Thunderbolt variants throughout the war. One of the most ambitious was the XP-72, an aircraft that looked like a Thunderbolt but carried an even more powerful engine capable of producing extraordinary horsepower. On paper, it promised performance beyond anything the original P-47 could achieve. Test flights showed tremendous potential, and some believed it might become America's ultimate piston-engine fighter. Then history took another unexpected turn. By the time the prototype was ready, jet aircraft such as the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star had already demonstrated where the future was heading. The XP-72 was quietly cancelled before it ever reached combat. One engineering masterpiece had arrived just as another era was ending. Few people today even remember it existed. The Thunderbolt's true legacy, however, was never measured by speed records or production numbers. It was measured by trust. Pilots trusted it to bring them home when every warning light was flashing. Ground troops trusted the unmistakable roar of its engine because it often meant help was only seconds away. Mechanics trusted its rugged design because they knew it could endure punishment that would destroy almost any other fighter. By the end of the war, the P-47 had flown hundreds of thousands of combat sorties, destroyed countless enemy vehicles, locomotives, bridges, and aircraft, and earned a reputation as one of the toughest combat aircraft ever built. It proved that survivability could be just as valuable as speed, and that overwhelming firepower, combined with intelligent engineering, could change the course of a battlefield. Today, beautifully restored Thunderbolts stand in museums and soar once again at air shows, their massive Pratt & Whitney engines producing the same unmistakable thunder that echoed across Europe more than 80 years ago. Veterans who heard that sound during the war remembered it not as noise, but as reassurance. Modern military aircraft may be faster, stealthier, and controlled by advanced computers, yet one lesson from the P-47 still shapes combat aviation. A machine that protects its pilot can change history. The flying tank disappeared from the front lines long ago, replaced by aircraft born in the jet age. But every time a combat aircraft returns safely despite overwhelming damage, every time engineers choose durability alongside performance, and every time that deep radial engine growl echoes across an airfield, the spirit of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt rises once more. Proof that sometimes the strongest weapon isn't the one that flies the fastest, but the one that refuses to fall.